We are in the lecture series of process measurement and instrumentation, and today's lecture is analytical instrumentation. Why analytical equipment is important? First, I should talk about it actually before coming to this slide. I think I should discuss about why you really need, as a chemical and process engineer, why you have to learn about analytical instrumentation. It's actually so far what we have discussed are process instrumentation that you can have it in the industry, actually the industrial large-scale processes, right? Large-scale operation. But analytical instrumentation, most probably you use in the laboratories, specifically for research and development purposes, and sometimes it is required for industrial development and also specifically for the industrial quality assurance requirement. So when you go to the industry, for sure, the laboratory in those industries or factories or whatever the places, there must be a certain required analytical instrumentation for the quality assurance purpose of that process. So sometimes some organizations conduct so much research development while they are working on the industrial processes. Like an example would be a certain company like Unilever, or sometimes a certain company like Hemas, or many other companies, while they are operating with the normal manufacturing or processing operations, they work on research and development, and they do research, and they go for new product formulations. They try to find the solutions for their environmental aspects like that. So they have analytical labs inside those industries. So and also the pharmaceutical industry is one major area where you can see these analytical instrumentation a lot. And so what is the requirement? Actually, we need to measure several, it might be sometimes these the principles that we discussed under the other process measurement, like temperature, pressure, level, flow, the concepts would be there inside an analytical instrumentation also. But mostly we focus on molecular level measurements, atomic level measurements, to find out concentrations of a certain sample, or maybe the molecular structures of a certain sample. Something we call it as characterization, molecular characterization. So this is the requirement in the analytical instrumentation or laboratory research and development. So most of these analytical techniques or analytical instruments, the theory behind it is electromagnetic radiation based theory. Why I say like that, you know that you have learned, I think you have some idea about the electromagnetic radiation, and then the electromagnetic spectrum, you have the idea. So what happens is, a general principle is, if you place any electromagnetic radiation, it might be starting from gamma rays to microwaves. It might be any type of electromagnetic rays. If you apply the electromagnetic radiation or any kind of these rays into molecules, you know that all the things in this world have molecules in chemistry wise, but a certain sample that contains a certain chemical, it might be a solid sample, it can be a liquid or gas sample. So if you apply the electromagnetic radiation, what happens is three phenomena can take place, right? Three major phenomena. Due to what? Due to absorption of the electromagnetic radiation, or might be reflection, or might be any other impact on the molecules due to the electromagnetic radiation. There can be these three things can happen. One thing is molecular can be dissociated, right? So if you apply a higher energy or higher frequency type electromagnetic radiation, like ultraviolets, X-rays or gamma rays, the molecular dissociation takes place. How it happens actually, when you apply a certain electromagnetic radiation, the energy is absorbed to the molecules, and you have learned in chemistry, basic chemistry, about the excitation of molecules and the energy levels you have learned, right? So, and you can explain it through the SPAD, molecule structure, and how the energy levels are there in a certain molecule or a certain atom, outside the atom, the electron energy levels, something like that. So we have a lot of theories to explain the Bohr's theory, and likewise you have learned these basics, I think, before. But the thing is, this principle is the major working concept behind the these analytical instruments. So as I told you, a higher energy electromagnetic radiation can dissociate the molecules. So due to the molecular dissociation, there can be certain energy absorption, and then you can have certain differences. You can detect the change of the wavelength or change of the frequencies or energy dissipation or energy absorption. Those things can be observed or detected electronically. You can detect the changes so that you can apply certain higher energy electromagnetic radiation like ultraviolet rays or something, and you can have it, right? You can have that effect, and you can measure different molecules dissociate in different ways, so that there will be the detected output signals will be different for each and every molecule. So you can have certain detection, so identification based on that. That's the higher side of the higher energy side, or shorter wavelength or higher frequency electromagnetic radiation. Then if you apply something like visible light or infrared, like a medium energy or medium wavelength electromagnetic radiation, then most probably rather than dissociation, molecular vibration can happen, right? So due to the vibration, so the molecules absorb the energy and they start to vibrate. So due to the vibration, they don't tend to dissociate. They vibrate. Due to vibration, again, you can detect certain changes, and the same way you can detect. Then longer wavelength or lower energy electromagnetic radiation like microwaves would affect like a molecular rotation rather than dissociation or vibration. So due to the rotations, again, you can have the same phenomena. So these excited energy levels of electrons and molecule electrons will be different. So based on these differences, again, you can identify different molecules. So it's something called, as in the beginning, as I told you, the characterization. Like you want to identify what molecules are there in your sample. Then this working principle, this concept is very useful to identify, right? So that is the concept behind these analytical techniques. So if you, clearly classify the analytical techniques, one major type of analytical techniques are these two things. You can hear these two names: spectroscopy and spectrometry, right? You have heard a lot of spectroscopy names and spectrometry names. Some students and some people actually confuse with these two. Actually, these two are two different things: spectroscopy and spectrometry. But the confusion is sometimes spectrometry and spectroscopy, these both of them we can use for certain one technique, right? So in that case, sometimes you confuse. Okay, you think like spectroscopy and spectrometry both are same, but it's not always. Sometimes you cannot use a spectroscopy for spectrometry techniques, and also you cannot use a spectrometry for spectroscopy techniques. So what is spectroscopy and spectrometry? According to IUPAC Gold Book, you can have, there are a lot of different definitions of spectroscopy and spectrometry. You can even Google search and see there are many definitions. The IUPAC Gold Book says that the spectroscopy is the study of physical systems by the electromagnetic radiation. So it's just a study, something like, you can generally use the spectroscopy name to, introduce a certain technique, right? The study of physical systems. So it's a qualitative study. So you can have, as an example, UV vis spectroscopy, right? Another thing, IR spectroscopy, like that. There are many spectroscopy. So we normally refer spectroscopy name for the study of physical system by the electromagnetic radiation. So with the electromagnetic radiation type, you can have it as an adjective and say this spectroscopy, this spectroscopy, that spectroscopy, like that. Then spectrometry is the analytical technique in most cases, like the quantitative technique. So spectroscopy would be mostly qualitative side, and spectrometry means the quantitative measurement technique. So according to IUPAC Gold Book, it is the measurement of electromagnetic radiation as a means of obtaining information about physical systems and their components. So you can see there's a slight difference. So if you want to further understand, this is another definition, right? Spectroscopy can be named as, again, study of interactions between matter and electromagnetic radiation, right? There's a study of interactions between matter and electromagnetic radiation. Spectrometry, measurement of the intensity of the radiation or particles or molecules or whatever it is using an electronic device, right? So you can see the difference. So scopy and metry is the two different. Scopy means observation, metry means measurement. So I hope you have heard about microscopy, right? So microscopy means observation. So you're using microscopy. So we don't say metric, right? We don't say micrometric. So there's a certain analytical technique called a scanning electron microscopy, right? So at there, what we do is we study using the technique, we study certain molecular structure or certain sample to study its structure, to study its particle sizes or something, and we observe. And based on the observation, we can make some measurement or calculation, but it's not so accurate with the quantitative side. Mostly it is kind of an observation, but spectrometry techniques, we can exactly measure with certain accuracy. So at there we measure some intensity, I mean the electronic signal intensity coming out as the output, right? So we have discussed about the measurement processes, and you know that how input and output work. So mostly in most of our previous measurement techniques also, the output is coming as an electronic signal. So that electronic signal can be used, we can convert it into intensity of a signal. Intensity means it's like when a certain signal is applied on a certain place, you know what is intensity means, the energy per square area, right? Normally called as intensity or flux. So this one can be obtained as a signal. So that is the intensity. Is most of the cases, intensity is the measurement coming out from spectrometric techniques. So if I again give you some examples, spectroscopy techniques. UV vis spectroscopy. It involves electronic transitions, just to observe the electronic transitions of molecules and a sample. While you have with the same name spectrometry, UV vis spectrometry, that is for quantitative analysis of molecules or biomolecules, right? So I hope you understand the difference. Similarly, you have IR spectroscopy that involves molecular vibrations, the observation of that, qualitative study, and IR spectrometry for detection of bonds and hence characterization and measurement, right? Similarly, you have other spectroscopy techniques and spectrometry. But one thing is here I have to highlight, that is mass spectrometry, right? Mass spectrometry, normally we don't use mass spectroscopy. So it's normally what we call it as mass spectrometry. No, we don't say mass spectroscopy, right? So every spectrometry is not a spectroscopy. So you can further say that a spectroscope is a device that measures the spectrum of light or any electromagnetic radiation. A spectrograph is an instrument that separates incoming light by its wavelength of frequency and records the results spectrum. So you have this another confusion of many students is understanding now I hope you are clear about spectroscope or scope and metric, two words. And there's another thing, graph. Now we have gas chromatography and gas chromatograph, right? Like that, spectroscope and spectrograph. So what's the difference? Spectrograph is the instrument. In that case, gas chromatography means the technique name, and gas chromatograph is the equipment or the instrument. And that there really we have a measurement. Okay, so like that, there are several wording or terms that you have to clearly understand when you go further in analytical techniques studies. This study about different analytical techniques and at least know what is the working principle behind each analytical technique is really important for you, because specifically if anyone is interested in higher studies, research work, and if you plan to go for higher studies after you graduate, for sure you have to have a good sound understanding about analytical techniques, because most of the cases, even though you go for research studies in computational side like modeling and simulation or something, you have to combine your research studies with the laboratory experiments. So you should have a sound understanding about analytical techniques, then only you can make your research work successful, right? And you can even develop new things or kind of explorations. You can go for discoveries, some inventions, real inventions. You should have thorough understanding. And people who don't go for higher studies, you should have a thorough understanding on analytical techniques. If you have any idea about one day I will develop my own product, then you should have the understanding. At least you are a working guy, a process engineer, you need to work on your products in your company and you need to improve. Then you have to do a lot of laboratory measurements and do some research and development. Then this understanding is really important. At least you should be able to understand or identify what technique, what equipment technique, what analytical technique that I should use for this purpose. That idea you must get, right? I hope in your industrial training also, you can get that experience if you go for a certain industrial place where these new equipments are there. An example would be if you go for Sling Tech, there will be a lot of almost all these analytical technical equipments, they have analytical equipments. And also, I know that personally, I know that places like Hemas, Unilever, and well-established manufacturing organizations also have these equipments. If you get a chance after going for industrial training or some thing, when you get a chance to see the outside, please try to at least get some understanding about these equipment. For sure, when you come for research project work in the final year, we will get some chance to see them. So spectroscopic techniques can be just simply given in this slide. So you can see, like for gamma rays, you have Mossberg spectroscopy, and X-ray, you have X-ray diffraction, X-ray fluorescence. These two are really important techniques, X-ray diffraction and X-ray fluorescence. I would tell you briefly as an example. If you have a solid sample that you require to find out the composition, right? I'm talking about not the ppm level compositions, but just the percentage level compositions. As an example, if you have a biomass sample and you want to know how much calcium and how much magnesium and how much other molecules, the elements, elemental study, elemental composition. If you want to know, you can use X-ray fluorescence technique, right? So X-ray fluorescence technique basically used for that, solid sample composition. Then X-ray diffraction technique is slightly different from fluorescence. What happens from X-ray diffraction is you can identify, that is also like you can identify a certain, certain compound or certain molecule or certain element. You can identify whether there is that one. An example would be like that is really that's something called characterization. So an example would be you can have a sample and you can first observe the sample using the X-ray diffraction. What happens is you place the X-ray beam onto the solid sample, and you place the X-ray sample, the X-ray radiation you place on the solid sample in an angle. So there is an angular system between the emitter of the X-ray and the sample and the detector. So due to the angle, when X-ray beam places on the sample in angular shape, there are the crystalline structures available in the sample reflects. So accordingly, you can identify from X-ray diffraction is crystalline structures. As an example, something like calcium carbonate. You can identify. It's just identification mostly, and if the developed you can short form, you can say XRD for X-ray diffraction. XRD techniques, most of the new novel equipments, they have the ability to measure also. Quantitative measurement also is possible based on the peak. So it gives you some peak. So you can compare with the standard peaks and find out which compound is available in this sample, something like that. So X-ray fluorescence also works in the similar manner, but it's the way the X-ray beam is placed on the solid sample, something like that is different. The working principle of how it is detected, there can be certain differences in the equipment. So XRF and XRD are like that. Then UV, ultraviolet rays also can be used. So accordingly, you have UV visible spectroscopy, atomic absorption spectroscopy, fluorescence spectroscopies, and phosphorescence spectroscopy, like that, right? The mini spectroscopies. So you can, again, using these spectroscopies, you can what you can do is you can observe the samples. As an example, if I say atomic absorption spectroscopy can be used to observe and find out, identify the certain heavy metals available in a sample, right? But not so accurate, not in ppm levels, but certain higher levels. So the sensitivities, accuracies are different from each technique to technique. So you should have some understanding about that also. The infrared techniques, infrared spectroscopy, Raman spectroscopy, they are based on the infrared absorption. And also there's one more important one, that is FTIR in short form, Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy. So that is, of course, one important equipment to characterize, so you find out. Then again, it's more developed compared to X-ray diffraction, because in X-ray diffraction, we can't identify the gas involvements, right? Because if there is a gas in your sample, an example would be you adsorb a gas into a solid sample and you measure it in X-ray diffraction. What you can observe is the certain compound in solid form. But if you use it in FTIR technique, infrared technique, you can identify the gas, how much gas adsorbed, right? So that like that, with the measurement purpose, you can use different techniques, right? In microwave spectroscopy, also a similar technique that you can use for different purposes, right? Further, if I tell you about some other spectroscopy techniques, this TEM in short form, you can say that transmission electron spectroscopy. That is electron spectroscopy. I hope you have learned about optical spectroscopy. That is a simple, actually not the spectroscopy, actually it is a microscopy, right? Actually, this is this should be a TEM, should be transmission electron microscopy. I'm sorry about saying spectroscopy, right? It should be microscopy. So all these three are microscopic techniques. You have learned about optical microscope, right? That's simply the signal is, you can say, unmeasured or optical microscope. That is, you know, right? You have even observed, but I don't know whether you have a chance. You have got a chance to see the scanning electron microscope or certain electron microscope. These three are three types of electron microscope. TEM is transmission electron microscope, and SEM is scanning electron microscope. AFM is atomic force microscope or microscopy. You can say for the technique, you can say microscopy. So what happens in transmission electron spectroscopy? You place a beam of electrons and you transmit the electron beam through the specimen, through a specimen, to form an image of them, right? A similar manner, what you do is, rather than transmission, you know that transmission and scanning is different. I hope you have seen the scanner. In a scanner, what happens is it doesn't transmit through the material, it scans, right? So scanning electron microscopy is just you scan the surface, while TEM transmits through the sample. So accordingly, the images are different, right? So you can see the sizing of the images, and the way you can detect the structures, molecular structures, are different, right? And atomic force microscopy is surface scanning, like scanning electron microscope, but the importance is it can go for sub-nanometer scale resolution. And you can specifically use for like air or liquid samples, because it can go for some specific, it has some specific specific application in nanoscale surface study. So something like nanoscale topologies can be studied, surfaces can be studied. So these three techniques are really important. Mostly what we use is, what we have is scanning electron microscope. So if I give you an example of getting a measurement, like let's say we have a certain solid sample, where you would need like a porous structure. An example would be an ash, because in my research work, I'm mostly focused on ash. I'm an ash person, so I'm trying with different ashes and try to characterize them and find out the different possibilities with ashes, industrial ashes coming out from boilers, because that the ashes are waste recovery. So my field is related to sustainability and environmental engineering. So I'm even with the this year final students or final year students, so I'm trying to study about ashes, right? How we can sequestrate some carbon dioxide into fly ashes, biomass ashes, and coal ashes, like that. So at there, I want to find out the particle size of ashes and see the porous structure, how many gaps are there. So for that, I go for particle size analysis and find out the particle size distribution of that. But sometimes I need to really verify the results taken from the particle size analyzer, and I want this to see the real image. So it's really important to see the image, how they are there and how they distributed through the structure. So then I go for scanning electron microscope and take the scanning image. Then that gives me very nicely how the particles have been placed and where the porous structures are there. Then I can even do some measurement based on the scale in the image. I can get the measurement about the particles also. So this is really important in particle technology. You need to understand the particle sizes and all. So very important technique for that purpose. And mostly in some research teams, in international teams, they have specifically go for imaging purposes, like molecular imaging purposes. So extensively they use these techniques for imaging several things and try to compare. You add certain surface treatment techniques to the samples, and first you get the raw sample scanning electron microscope image, and you get the SEM image of the treated sample, and you compare and say some conclusions, some results you can obtain, like that. Some big research work is there based on these techniques, right? So normally any research work related to solid samples, mostly they conduct certain electron microscope, certain experiment and try to find out its particle sizes and all as a property evaluation for the sample. Then you have other techniques like X-ray photon correlation spectroscopy, X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy, X-ray diffraction, as I mentioned previously. So as I mentioned previously, the sample should be a crystalline sample for X-ray diffraction. So there are some limitations with certain techniques like that. But for the purpose, if you really have a crystalline sample, you can go for XRD and measure that, right? So this is very important in catalyst development or something. Now, if you have used certain catalysts like nickel or palladium or something, or platinum or something in a catalyst support like alumina or maybe zirconium dioxide or something like that, some support, then the support is normally, if you use alumina or something, that is crystalline structure. And you can detect what happens to your catalyst support after the reaction takes place. So like that, you can characterize your catalyst samples, right? So like that, there are many immense applications in research side. Right? And Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, as I told you, it's try to understand the functional groups inside the sample, or we can say substituent groups, right? So and also similar technique is Raman spectroscopy. That is also mostly for solid samples, and sometimes this FTIR is okay for gas samples also, right? Then UV visible also functionalization technique to understand the functional groups, that is called characterization, and try to figure out what functional groups available in the sample. Functional groups means certain type of molecules, certain type of, if it is hydrocarbon type, there is one functional group. Like that, you can identify, okay, this has a hydrocarbon, this has this kind of gas molecule, something like that you can identify, okay? So again, if I summarize these techniques in another way, most of the techniques like mass spectrometry and chromatography, chromatography actually I'm going to talk next. So almost all these techniques have commonly what they measure is sometimes the structure of molecules or identification of certain molecules or functional groups inside. Sometimes they measure the concentrations, right? So accordingly, what we get is a certain results graph. So most of these techniques are attached with the computer. So you can see if you go for mass spectrometry or MS or maybe gas chromatograph, you have an attached computer. So there's a dedicated software for that to convert the signal output into the graphical format, and you will see some graphs with intensities, and accordingly you have to sometimes conduct calibration for the equipment before you do the experiment for the unknown sample. You have to conduct some calibration with the known sample. As an example, you have, let's say there are standards for almost all these equipments. There are standards available. So if you want to measure a certain type of functional groups, you should have a standard with you, and you should have the relevant parts for the technique with you. Then only you can, first you have to calibrate with the standard sample and find out what intensity for the standard sample, and then accordingly you can, secondly you can go for the unknown sample, and you can compare that with the calibrated one. That of course automatically can be done using the computer software available with the attached with the equipment. Then you can do the measurement and get the quantitative results, right? So that is how it happens. Sometimes it gives you peaks, like in the bottom figure, it's like a peak. So you will have to calculate the area under the peak in certain cases. Sometimes it will get just intensity graphs like the first one. So it's just intensity, so you can directly measure the intensity, something like that, right? So I hope you get to understand. Then if I mainly focus on chromatography, because next time I'm going to talk a little bit about chromatography, because I feel like it's really important for you as chemical engineers to know, because you have to deal with gases and you have to measure the gases sometimes in the industry also. So there are many techniques. Paper chromatography is the very basic one. Then thin layer chromatography, column chromatography, and most developed ones and standard techniques are high performance liquid chromatography. Simply you can say HPLC, and gas chromatography or gas liquid chromatography. So some GCs are gas liquid chromatography. So in that case, you can measure both gases and liquids. And most of the cases, it is just gas chromatography. Then you have only gas measurements can be performed. So sometimes some research organizations have both gas chromatography dedicated for gas samples and gas liquid chromatography dedicated for liquid samples. So because you have to change the columns and all the parts when you convert from gas to liquid in some cases. So because of that, you have to have dedicated equipment for liquid and gas samples if you use gas chromatography techniques. So in overall, if you compare the microscopy with the spectroscopy, the size of the size of the samples, you can start from picometer or nanometer sizes to the centimeter sizes or meter sizes. In microscopy, you can go for the lowest size. You can go for the crystallography technique, something called atomic imaging. Then you have electron microscopy for the nanometer scale, and you have just microscopy for the micrometer range, like optical microscopy or something, and thermography, thermal imaging techniques for millimeter scale, right? Millimeter, micrometer scale, and radar or microwave imaging for the centimeter scale. So that is how normally electron microscope also works with X-rays, right? So you prepare the electrodes by X-rays. You know that how electrons can be emitted by placing X-ray or something onto a certain metallic surface. That is called photoelectric effect theory. So that is used to generate the electrons for the microscope. Similarly, for crystallography, you use gamma rays. So similarly, you can see that how when the energy becomes low in the electromagnetic radiation, the analytical techniques, the size measurements will be increased. Similarly, other side, with the energy of the this electromagnetic radiation, when the energy of the radiation increases, again the spectroscopy is also increases with the accordingly with the electromagnetic radiation. An example, you can start for the lower energy measurements like molecular conductivity, molecular orientation, or something like that. You just use microwaves because you need molecular rotation. If you want chemical bond, or a certain measurement that requires the bond energy or something, then you can go for vibrations, IR spectrometry, spectroscopy, and UV-Vis spectroscopy. X-ray spectroscopy and UV-Vis can be used for elemental analysis, and when you really need to know the individual measurements, right? So basically, you can have three types of analysis from all these analytical techniques. One is qualitative analysis. Qualitative analysis means the detection of the presence but not quantity of chemical. So X-ray diffraction technique, as an example, is just a qualitative analysis technique. You can just detect, okay, calcium carbonate is available in the sample. That's all. You can't say how much, right? But quantitative analysis is the measurement of the quantity of a substance in a mixture. So some equipments, you have both qualitative and quantitative analysis. An example is gas chromatograph, and another example is mass spectrometry. So they have the ability to first detect what is there, what is it, and identify it, and then measure the quantity. So the other thing is structural analysis. Then that is specifically for the microscopic techniques, and some spectroscopy technique like NMR and Raman. So you can go for structural analysis. That is the measurement of how the atoms or molecules are placed in a structure, right? So these are the analysis that you can conduct. So another important type of analytical equipment is photometers. So photospectrometer means, otherwise spectrophotometer. The principle is you use light beam, and that light beam applies on the sample, and there is a reflection. So the returning light, you can filter it, and it's kind of deviation happens to some optical system like mirrors or something, and the filtered sample can be detected. Accordingly, you will have the wavelength intensities, right? So you will sometimes for photometers, basic photometers, you have discrete wavelength reading. For spectrophotometers, you have sometimes continuous wavelength spectrum for all the types of molecules in the sample. So the same purpose can be conducted using FTIR or other techniques also, right? So if you have FTIR, it's not so required to buy a mass spectrometer for the, but mass spectrometer is a kind of a little, it's a low-cost equipment compared to FTIR or something. So in some laboratories, you can see this. So that's why I explained about it. So this also have a link with the mass MS technique. In mass spectrometer technique, what happens is, it measures the mass to charge ratio. What happens is at there some ionization happens to the sample, gas sample, and due to the ionization, the different masses. So if there are isotopes, those isotopes will be having different mass to charge ratio. If the mass of the isotopes are different, so the gas isotopes will have different mass to charge ratios. So accordingly, you can identify what isotopes are available in the sample, and accordingly you can detect the sample. So that is how it conducts. So the similar concept is there in mass spectrophotometer also. What happens is the same principle I explained based on the light source. When it applies to the sample, it provides, and you can convert it into digital display also, right? Then I told you that I would discuss about gas chromatography in little detail. So chromatography I told you that chromatography has a lot of other techniques, but I'm here specifically talking about gas chromatography. Normally in any chromatography technique, you have two phases: stationary phase and mobile phase. So your sample is in station. I mean, normally your sample you have to inject into the GC, right? So but to detect what happens is, here is actually we use a certain mixture, and let's say a gas mixture. In the gas mixture, we need to identify each and every gas. So there is certain kind of multi-component separation takes place. For the multi-component separation to be taken place, normally in chromatography technique, what happens is they use, in gas chromatography, they use a certain column, right? So in these columns, there is a certain stationary phase applied. So what happens is you need a mobile phase to send all the molecules in the sample, gas molecules, through the column. Then you need a mobile phase. So mobile phase is created using a carrier gas. Normally, the carrier gas is a certain noble gas or inert gas. Normally, you use helium or argon. So that will carry the gas sample. Then when gas sample transfers through the column, as you can see in this animation, different gas samples has different velocities, and in the stationary space, the stationary phase is there inside the column, and due to the stationary phase, some of the gas molecules become slower, right? And some are attached to the this stationary phase. Something called adsorption happens, right? So due to that, this velocity will be slower, and you can see clear differences of the intensities for each and every different gas molecules, right? So that is the principle of gas chromatography, and this of course can be detected, and there is a computer with the data system, softwares and all the programs, so that you can convert the peaks, the detection into peaks, intensities into peak. So the very important thing is there, because now the separation of the gas sample is happened by this column, because the column has a stationary phase, that is some kind of adsorbent or something is there. So this stationary phase, nothing but the column, is really important, because if you want to measure certain specific gases, you have to change the column, right? You cannot measure all the gases by the same kind of column, same type of column. An example I would say, if you want to measure carbon dioxide in a sample, you should have a specific column for that, right? And let's say in the sample you have one more specific gas like sulfur dioxide or something. Then sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide both cannot be measured by a certain previous column that can measure the carbon dioxide. Then you have to go for specific another column type which can measure, which can absorb actually the SO2 also, sulfur dioxide also. So like that, based on your measurement application, you should select the column, and normally these gas columns are a little expensive, so you have to purchase them. So that is why sometimes in certain cases, even though the gas chromatography is there, but high-end research cannot be conducted due to the expensiveness of the columns and the complexity of the experiment sometimes. But of course, if you have the columns and other infrastructure, you can conduct nice experiments using gas chromatograph. So it's really important in gas measurements in the industry also, because gas sensing is one side of area in engineering. So chemical engineering, in gas sensing, sometimes the gas sensors are not so reliable like the online gas sensors that nowadays we have. So even though you measure by a gas sensor in the real process, sometimes you need to verify it with high accurate gas chromatography technique in the laboratory. So a certain sample you can take and check and verify whether it's correct. So because this gas chromatography technique is more accurate than normal gas sensing techniques, right? But of course, in mobile applications, you can't use gas chromatograph. Then you have to go for gas analyzers and gas sensors, right? Okay. So I hope I explained about this in the previous slide, so it's not so required. So this is for your reference. You can read and understand as a note, right? Then again, the same thing. You can see that this picture also explains how gas chromatography is working. And of course, you have carrier gas, and sometimes this syringe is for batch type. I mean, like you have a sample in batch mode and you have to inject it and measure. Sometimes you might have real-time samples, right? Real-time sample, if you have, I mean, like you can continuously connect to the, now gas chromatography again can be used attached with the, I mean, continuous operation in the process also in the factories. So in that case, you should have real-time measurement. There is a way to do the real-time measurement, but there should be some connections and some other accessories should be there. And mostly the very important thing is the detector, because there are many types of detectors available. Normally the most available one is thermal type detectors. So in thermal type detectors, the sensitivity or the accuracy is limited, and sometimes you have to go for some other ionization type detectors and all for more accurate detection. So in real analysis, sometimes you might have to move for high detective gas chromatographs, right? So in a summary, this slide summarizes the techniques, and there's the chromatography techniques. Not only gas chromatography, I told you HPLC and other chromatography techniques are there. What is the stationary phase? What is the mobile phase? And what kind of absorption mechanism is there. So sometimes it can be ion exchange, sometimes it can be adsorption. So like that, right? So one important concept in nowadays is, now we talked about a lot of in analytical equipments techniques. Now the important thing is nowadays some of these techniques they don't come as one technique, right, as one equipment. So there is a hyphenation available that is called hyphenation, or combining 2 or 3 techniques into one equipment. So one kind of that type of hyphenated equipment is GC-MS. I hope you have heard GC-MS. So likewise, you can see GC FTIR, right? Or otherwise, you can see GC ICP, or sometimes some have ICP-MS, right? ICP-MS. ICP means inductively coupled plasma technique. I didn't explain about that much. Normally, ICP, inductively coupled plasma technique, is used to measure heavy metals, kind of ppm level measurements. So ICP and MS is connected. So the MS works as the detector in this case, because I told you that chromatography, in gas chromatography, you can detect the gases, but the thermal detector or the detector type determines its accuracy. So you can use the mass analyzer or the mass spectrometer or this MS technique, where it has more accurate mass to charge ratio measurements. Ionization. So ionization is more accurate compared to thermal detection. So the MS part is working as the detector for the GC. So you can go for real-time measurements without any problem and more accurate detection, right? So like that, there are many hyphenated techniques. So as a summary, if I summarize all the analytical instrumentation, if I try to talk, I can talk more than 1 hour. I mean, a lot of details we can discuss, but we forgot to discuss about gravimetric techniques, right? But I will simply say here, it's in a summary, we have gravimetric techniques. What do you mean by gravimetric techniques is just you use the weight of the samples and go for, measure some other property. An example is thermal gravimetric analyzer, TGA, right? That's also very important equipment, analytical equipment that we must have in our laboratories. What happens in there is you can identify thermal decomposition of a certain component. An example, if you have a calcium carbonate sample, right? So it's thermally decomposed. After decomposition, you know that it emits carbon dioxide. So in carbon dioxide capture experiments, most of the cases with solid capturing, solid samples, they convert it into carbonates, right? So these carbonates, we want to measure how much carbon dioxide was attracted into carbonate. So degree of carbonation or percentage of carbonation. In that case, we use TGA equipment and we decompose it at around 800 or 900 degrees Celsius. And the emitted carbon dioxide amount can be measured by the weight difference before decomposition and after decomposition. So that is called, if you use the weight difference, or sometimes you can precipitate certain thing and you can check the mass increase. decompose and observe the mass decrease. So mass increase and decrease measurement is actually a weight measurement, not mass. So weight measurements, through that you call it as gravimetric techniques. And others are spectroscopy and spectrometry techniques that we discuss, like XRD, XRF, UV, MR, FTIR. And chromatography techniques we discuss GC, HPLC, and the hyphenated techniques of them, like GCMS, ICP-MS, TGA-MS. Even TGA can be combined with MS, GCFTIR, and ICP technique also I mentioned. So like that, there are many analytical techniques that you should have some understanding about these as chemical engineers. Okay, so that's the end of analytical instrumentation lecture. Have a nice day and stay safe.